Now, here's the original Morgan building, right on the corner, this big block, with with an ad for a movie called Dumb Money in the window. It was built on the same 23 Wall Street.
I'm standing with John Fullerton at the corner of Wall Street and Broad, right across from the New York Stock Exchange.
This is the iconic Morgan building. It never had the name Morgan on it, because if you didn't know, you didn't need to know.
And
now
you had an office in here?
Yeah, my first job out of the training program was I was sitting right above those flags on the 5th floor.
Now in his early 60s, John is living a very different life than what he imagined when he was a fast-rising star at J.P. Morgan.
I think I was one of the youngest MDs ever promoted at the bank at the time.
MD for Managing Director. He earned that title before his 30th birthday. It felt good, John says, because he was excelling in a job that, he admits, made him feel like a member of the elite, but also because he believed his company played an important role in the world by financing and advancing the global economy.
And, we took great pride in having a J.P. Morgan Managing Director business card. That was my identity.
But the day came a few years later when things started to shift for John. He's working at Morgan headquarters in New York. He and his wife have bought a house in the suburbs and started a family. In 1993, he gets yet another promotion.
So at any rate, I got put in charge of the global commodities and commodity derivatives business. And
he finds himself one day on a flight to Asia to meet with his team there. But his second daughter has just been born, and it's a particular Sunday in June.
So I was sitting in Singapore Air, first class, champagne, noon flight, Sunday, Father's Day. And I had the New York Times in my lap with all the time in the world to read it. And, Mr. Big Shot at a young age, I should be happy. And I was miserable. And the reason I was miserable is I didn't want to be leaving for probably a 2-week trip when I just had a newborn at home, and it was Father's Day, and I was sitting in an airplane. So I began to question, what am I doing? And so I looked down, and on my lap is the New York Times, and on the right-hand...
On the front page of that newspaper is an article about the billionaire publishing mogul Walter Annenberg. He's announced he's donating several $100 million to 3 major universities and to the New Jersey prep school he attended as a kid. You could say John Fullerton sees his future flash before his eyes. And maybe surprisingly, he doesn't like what he sees.
It just seemed insane to me that, I would spend my whole life on airplanes on Father's Day, metaphorically, in order to write a couple checks to institutions that didn't need the money, in order to put my name on the wall or get an article written about me in the New York Times. And no disrespect to Walter Annenberg, he was doing what we were supposed to do, but I decided that day I wasn't going to do that. And it took me until 2001 to walk out the door. But that was really the day I not only quit Morgan, but quit my career.
That moment sent Fullerton on a journey of many years and many more pivotal moments of discovery. He didn't know what was next, maybe something in education, working with charter schools. Just months after he resigned from J.P. Morgan in September 2001, he happened to be in Lower Manhattan when the planes slammed into the World Trade Center towers.
So I got to the street at City Hall, literally as the second fireball was exploding out of the building. And I didn't see the plane go into the building, but I saw the fireball.
As for so many other people, that traumatic day shook John deeply.
And really triggered this search for what the hell's going on in the world. And that got me reading books that, as I always say, bankers don't read.
Those included books about human-made climate change and the threat of ecological collapse.
I used to think of it, save the whale, save the owl, but it never occurred to me that it was a whole systemic thing. And it certainly never occurred to me that the root cause of it was our economic system breaking the planet. And when that realization happened, I then sort of looked in the mirror and realized it was young kids like me who think they're so smart who are actually driving, because finance really drives the economy. It's what the economy is in service to financial capital in more ways than we realize. And so I had this sort of just, it wasn't like a single shock event. It was this like rolling awareness that, oh my God, everything that I believed in is actually, profoundly destructive.
After more years of study and reflection, Fullerton would reemerge as an economic reformer and teacher. In 2010, he founded a nonprofit called the Capital Institute, which, though it might not sound like it from the name, offers a radical critique of capitalism in its current form.
The gig's up. The gig's up. And we've got to find a new source of prosperity than continuous extraction.
Fullerton is convinced that one way or another, deep change is coming. Change so big, it might be more profound than the shift from the medieval to the modern age. In fact, he thinks that shift has begun.
Certainly by 2050, we will refer to this period as something different than the modern age. And I think it will be about, the work is about this coming to grips with the reality that the entire economic system paradigm that we've built has run its course and can't continue, and will be deep into the transformation into something different. And I don't think anyone can possibly have any confidence to know what that's going to look like.
So, Ellen, we're going to be hearing more from John Fullerton later in the series.
I look forward to it. He seems really interesting.
Ellen McGirt, welcome. You are a seasoned, award-winning business and economics reporter and editor, currently editor-in-chief at the online magazine Design Observer, and my co-host for Season 7, I am delighted to say.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. I am thrilled to be here, John. I've been a huge fan of Seen on Radio for years, and John Fullerton's story is emblematic of so many conversations I'm having with business people, including top corporate executives. Now, admittedly, Fullerton is an extreme case.
Yeah.
Yes. To go from managing director at J.P. Morgan, one of the iconic banking corporations on the planet, to becoming someone who doesn't want to just tweak the economic system, but wants to totally transform it, I'd say that's pretty rare.
That's one reason, as you can imagine, that I wanted to interview him. But another is that so much of what he's saying in his critique of the current system and his ideas about how it needs to change are actually not so unusual these days.
That's quite true. Even in the business world, quite a few people are circling these issues, some very reluctantly, no question about that. But there is a growing sense that our economic system just can't go on this way and has to change somehow.
Folks might think a series called Capitalism is going to be about economic theory, dollars and cents, and pesos and euros and yen. But I think you and I agree this series is really about values.
Exactly right. What is important? What do we care about? What kind of people do we want to be, individually and collectively? And really, is this, I'm waving my hands around at the world, the best we can do?
There are things that people everywhere claim to believe in. Every culture, every major spiritual tradition. You should care for others. Taking way more than your share is bad. So is the abuse of power.
If you make a mess, you should clean it up. Work is a virtue and should be rewarded. We also like to say, put your money where your mouth is, meaning your actions, including your financial actions, ought to be consistent with your beliefs.
So if our economic system creates conditions where the values we espouse are grossly violated, routinely, as part of the regular course of things, as people literally go about their business according to the rules of the game, that could mean we really don't care about those things we claim to care about.
Or it could mean we're living with an economic system that's out of alignment with our most basic values. And if that's true, how did that happen? And isn't it time we did something about it?
From the Kenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University, welcome to Scene on Radio, Season 7, Capitalism. This is Episode 1. I'm John Biewen, producer and host of the show.
And I'm Ellen McGirt.
People can, and do, tell simple, one-sided stories about capitalism. Here's one. It unleashed human ingenuity, leveraged the power of investment and technology and competition, and sparked unimaginable leaps in the material lives of most people on the planet.
Here's another. Capitalism triggered a new epoch of exploitation and extraction and produced unheard of inequality and alienation, all while doing catastrophic damage to our natural world.
Is either story too simple by itself? What if both are essentially true?
Here in the 2020s, the world is on edge, and it seems on the edge of something. We've been living through all these crises, a global pandemic and the economic shock that came with it, attacks on democracy in the U.S. and elsewhere, a major war in Europe, which shook up world markets for energy and food, war in the Middle East, and the surging climate emergency.
All that fresh turmoil comes on top of longer-term economic changes that, over decades, have disrupted lives and eroded people's hopes about the future for themselves and their kids.
Stir in rapid technological change, the latest and biggest, AI, which could make our lives better, or possibly much worse.
With all of this churning, a lot of people are asking sharp questions about the institutions and systems that have shaped our world, including capitalism.
There's a new survey from the public relations firm Edelman, surveying over 34,000 people around the world. The firm found 56% of respondents that capitalism does more harm than good. In the U.S., 47% had a distrust of capitalism.
A growing majority of young adults in the U.S. have a more negative view of capitalism, according to a new study from Axios and Momentive. According to the poll...
Let's not overstate things. In the U.S., the world's leading economic power, a majority of people still approve of capitalism and say they prefer it to the alternative that's usually offered in these surveys, socialism. But why are more people questioning capitalism? Well, let's start with soaring, eye-popping inequality.
There is something profoundly wrong in our country when the top 1/10 of 1%, not 1%, 1/10 of 1%, owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%. That is immoral. That is wrong.
There was also the loss of millions of manufacturing jobs in rich countries under globalization over the last number of decades. This created an opening for populist politicians on the left and the right to attack the free trade policies that presidents from both parties had pushed for decades.
New England, you go to Ohio, Pennsylvania, you go anywhere you want, Secretary Clinton, and you will see devastation where manufacturing is down 30, 40, sometimes 50%. NAFTA is the worst trade deal maybe ever signed anywhere, but certainly ever signed in this country. And now...
Let's pause to point out that once he got into office, Donald Trump didn't do much to help working people or their communities. Yes, he negotiated changes to NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, but his biggest domestic policy achievement was a massive tax cut that mostly benefited corporations and the wealthiest Americans.
Nonetheless, Trump's anti-free trade rhetoric struck a chord with millions of people who felt overlooked and even abused by a global, let the market do its thing, capitalist economy.
The widening chasm between struggling workers and billionaire owners has also fueled a reawakened labor movement.
Amazon warehouse workers in New York made history last Friday, voting to unionize its Staten Island facility.
It's Amazon versus the people, and the people have spoken.
There's now first ever unions at some 200 Starbucks, an Apple Store, Amazon, Google, REI, Trader Joe's, Kickstarter, and a gaming division of Microsoft.
Turning now to the auto workers' strike. The union says the walkout could expand this week as negotiations continue today with the country's three biggest automakers.
Another major source of alarm about capitalism, the increasing sense that an economic system devoted above all to profit and growth is driving the world off an ecological cliff.
Not only will this be the hottest July on record, this will be the hottest month human civilization has ever seen.
We have to overthrow this system which is eating the planet with perpetual growth. Yeah, we're bursting through all the environmental boundaries and screwing the planet already. You want to double it? Double all that? Double it again? Keep doubling it? It's madness. We've got to go straight to the heart of capitalism and overthrow it.
That's the writer and activist George Monbiot. Is that what we're talking about? Overthrowing capitalism? The actual pitchforks, or whatever their equivalent would be in the 21st century, don't seem to be out in big numbers yet. But
Deloitte's annual global survey of more than 2,000 C-suite leaders found that 62% of leaders feel worried about climate change all or most of the time.
corporate leaders are feeling some heat.
But 82% of executives say they've been personally impacted by extreme climate events in some way, and their stakeholders are pressuring them to act.
That pressure on corporate execs isn't just about climate.
It's been a breakout year for environmental, social, and governance issues known better as ESG. And Leslie Picker's been...
Over the past decade, companies and investors moved to embrace ESG, a business philosophy that declares a concern for things other than just profits. Corporations pledged to add more Black and brown people to their management teams and corporate boards, to reduce their carbon footprint, and, in a few cases, to say no to the whopping executive pay raises that are now typical in corporate America.
These were relatively small reforms, or promised reforms. Some would say window dressing. But still, the backlash followed. Right-wing politicians attacked what they call woke capitalism.
ESG is a clear and present danger to consumers and to our democracy. An unelected cabal of global elites is using ESG to hijack our capitalist system, capture corporations, and threaten hard-earned dollars of American workers.
Florida is pulling $2 billion worth of state investments managed by BlackRock over its commitment to a woke agenda and ESG funding.
We are going to kneecap ESG in the state of Florida.
The backlash has had an effect, at least in the U.S. A report in late 2023 found that the biggest investment companies, including BlackRock and Vanguard, had dramatically cut back their support for environmental and social proposals inside the companies they back.
Now, I'm not ready to call time of death on ESG, but I will concede that capitalists are getting it from all sides. At the same time, if you put aside the rhetoric and look at the facts on the ground, capitalism looks more dominant than ever, more unchallenged.
Even the world's biggest self-described communist country is now, in a real sense, a capitalist superpower.
China's stocks are jumping today as Chinese top finance regulators point to more economic openings to foreign institutions.
The fact is, capitalism shapes the lives of humans and other living things arguably more than any other social force. It moves mountains, and I do mean that literally. But it's also half invisible to us, so pervasive, so much the water we swim in now that we can have trouble seeing where it begins and ends in our worlds and in our lives.
It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. The philosopher Frederick Jameson is supposed to have said that. Others have tweaked the quote to say, it's easier to imagine the end of capitalism than what comes after.
Hi.
Hi, I'm John. I'm here to talk to... Ellen, this excursion was closer to home for me. I'm showing up at a child care center called Little Believers Academy in Clayton, North Carolina, outside of Raleigh.
Oh, I wish we had the pictures.
Trust me, we are talking off the charts adorableness. Dozens of little ones, from infants and toddlers to the pre-K 4-year-olds. They and their teachers are spread across several colorful classrooms in 2 small buildings and a big outdoor space with playsets and toys.
Hi, my name is Cassandra Brooks, and I am the owner of Little Believers Academy. We have 2 locations, one in Clayton and one in Garner.
Cassandra founded her first daycare business in 2012.
I had got laid off some time ago when I worked in corporate America, and I started volunteering, and I really found a passion and a niche in working with the children.
She went and got her master's degree in education, then started with a small home-based center.
And I just really, really enjoyed it, and I felt more connected to my community. I felt like I was really impacting, children and making an impact on the world. And so that's just how we kept going from there.
We gotta get some soap, sir. There we go. Can you rub it?
In the infant and toddler room, the 2-year-olds have just come in from outside. Teacher Charlene Brooks, no relation to Cassandra, is helping them one by one to wash their hands.
There we go, buddy. Wash, 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 wash. I know you love the water. I know. I love working with children, to see them grow and mature, and just the little stages, I think, brings a smile to my heart.
Ellen, you and I are both parents.
Yes.
You probably remember what it's like trying to figure out the whole childcare question.
Yes, I do. And I sort of miss those days. But I happened to be working from home, sort of a nervous writer-editor at the time, when my kids were small. So I had a little bit of a leg up on some other parents. But I've done a lot of reporting on this issue, too. And that gave me so much appreciation for the challenges and for the people, mostly women and women of color, who do such important, necessary work.
That's kind of what I said to Charlene Brooks. I would send my kids to you. I got a lump in my throat when I said it, because it all came back, how fraught it is to leave your child with strangers, and the relief when your kid is in a place where people are loving on him and keeping him safe. That feeling when you're dropping your 3-4-year-old off, the way you want to feel about that place and the way they're going to be taken care of.
Exactly.
There's nothing more important.
Exactly. You want to feel the care and the love. No matter how you look at it, you have to have a passion for working in childcare, because the money is not there. So that's not the reason I'm coming here every day.
The money is not there. Of course, this is where we were going with this. The economics, the economy of childcare.
Which is a travesty and a tragedy, at least in the USA.
Childcare is too expensive for most families to comfortably afford. The cost can be a crippling burden. Some poorer parents spend almost half their household income on childcare. And the other side of the equation, the average annual pay for a childcare worker in the U.S. is painfully low, just under $30,000 a year.
Charlene's wage of $14.50 an hour puts her right at the national average.
Thankfully, I have a husband, but $14.50 is really not even enough to pay all of my bills if I had to do it on my own.
Of course, a lot of childcare workers do not have partners who earn more than they do. Many are single moms, so the people doing this essential work often live near or in poverty.
Cassandra Brooks, the owner of Little Believers, is caught in the middle, between her teachers who struggle to live on what she can pay them, and her customers, the parents, a lot of them low income, who struggle to pay her rates and can't handle much more.
It doesn't balance out. Nobody wants to work for free or work in the hole. I've had friends this year who had to go out and get loans just to help cover payroll already.
She's talking about friends who run childcare centers.
You know, John, childcare as an industry is in perpetual crisis. But as we record this, things are especially dire. A big federal subsidy put in place at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic propped up childcare centers and their workers for a couple of years, but Congress allowed it to expire in the fall of 2023.
Leaving the industry to run on laissez-faire economics and the wildly spotty patchwork of subsidies or lack thereof from state and local governments. Some estimates say tens of thousands of childcare centers will have to shut their doors in the next few years. That'll make the national shortage much, much worse. I wondered about the future of Cassandra's business.
I I can't really say. I take it day by day. I'm a prayerful person. I pray daily and always looking to God for direction. Is this really the right thing? Is this really? But then I think about the children. I think about the families. And, that we're doing so much to impact them, So that's why I keep going. This isn't a viable business. You're not making, enough percentage here. You're crazy. You can go do this. That's what a regular entrepreneur, business owner would do. So, yeah.
As a market, it simply doesn't work, does it?
It doesn't work. It doesn't work.
And there you have it. Markets are supposed to work. That's one of the central selling points we hear about the free enterprise system. It's the magic of supply and demand. Now, if people really want or need something, the market will provide. So consumers get taken care of, and the business person and her employees, they prosper too if they've got something to sell that people want to buy. Everybody wins.
But childcare is just one of many market failures. And doesn't it almost seem like there's a correlation? The more essential the service or the product, the more fundamental it is to human health and survival, the more likely that the free market won't provide it reliably or affordably. Look at the United States. Healthcare and health insurance.
How about food? Think of the low-income, mostly Black and brown and immigrant communities that don't have enough good options for nutritious, affordable food.
But we do have miles of aisles in every supermarket devoted to sweets and salty chips.
Right. Housing. How many people in our country can't afford rent, let alone to own a home? It's another gigantic market failure with huge effects on millions of lives.
John Fullerton told me about that newspaper story that gave him a wake-up call about the billionaire philanthropist. When I was in the early days of doing research for this project in January 2023, a headline on the front page of the New York Times stopped me in my tracks. It's still on my desk. It said, "Soaring prices in Britain leave children hungry."
Wow, I see what you mean. We could read that headline and think, well, of course. With inflation, food is more expensive, sadly. It's not a surprise. But if you stop and think, really? In the 2020s, in the richest countries the world has ever seen, we've organized ourselves around the ability to pay the market price for things, and those things include food for our kids. And if you don't have enough money, your kids go hungry. It's just that simple? Really?
And the debate on these issues then is usually about government policy. How will government fill these gaps, feed hungry children, create affordable housing, get people health insurance, or prop up the child care system? What we're pointing out here is simply the fact that the market, left to itself, doesn't get it done.
Right, if there's not enough profit to be made. Businesses don't compete hard for customers with no money, and that is not acknowledged often enough. What else do we think we know about capitalism? Well, we think it means economic freedom and opportunity. Work hard and you can make it. You, me, anyone. And you might just make it big.
This is the stuff of our civic religion, certainly here in the U.S. and in lots of other capitalist societies. I'm not going to sit here and say there's no truth to these narratives. There is, for some people, some of the time. But.
Yeah, right. But.
I think a lot of our listeners would agree that this season, this topic, has been coming for a while on this show.
Yeah.
We've been circling, kind of poking at it for years now.
Well, capitalism is in everything. You and your collaborators took on race, gender, American democracy, and the lack thereof, the climate crisis. It's been an important part of your approach, which I love, to explore the power dynamics at work and to follow the money.
Yeah, we've often asked, what are the economic underpinnings of these systems, these powerful social forces? And as we kind of tugged at those threads, it seemed like they kept leading to the same unavoidable knot at the heart of things.
Capitalism.
So here we are. This series will build on those other seasons, and we'll do callbacks and point out connections as we go.
Now, John, this being seen on radio, we're going to move past the simple narratives, aren't we? And we're going to go back.
Yeah, we're going to go back. We've learned on this show that there's power in origin stories. So we're going to trace the steps as capitalism emerged and evolved and try to understand how people, especially people with power, how they shaped the system over time. And maybe we'll be able to see capitalism's essence more clearly.
And then, just maybe, we'll be equipped to see our choices more clearly. How do we want to organize our relationships around work, wealth, and the things we all need to live and thrive? People made our economic system. We can choose to remake it.
Over the coming episodes, we're going to start in medieval times and travel into the early modern era in Europe. As feudalism lost its grip, people who were not yet called capitalists started building a powerful new economic machine.
Through the Industrial Revolution and the stunning emergence of American economic power, on into the 20th century with its booms and busts and ideological pushing and pulling, up to our current troubled, contested moment.
At every step, we'll keep our eyes on the majority, regular working people, and how the changes affected their lives. And we'll examine the ideas and shifting cultural values, or propaganda, some would say in some cases, that enabled and justified these profound shifts, for better and for worse.
And later in the series, we'll spend some time exploring deep critiques of 21st century capitalism, critiques not just from the left, as you'd expect, but from the right as well. And we'll consider alternatives, real-world models that people are doing, ranging from reforms of capitalism as we know it, to more radical transformations.
So, in the past on this show, we've been known to say a few words about our positionality, if you will. For example, doing a season on whiteness or patriarchy, I wanted to make clear that I understood that it mattered that I'm a white cisgender dude.
Yes, and I'm a cis woman, and I've been Black my whole life.
This time it's capitalism, so we should say a bit about our relationship to that. A question for you, Ellen. You wrote for Time magazine. You've done lots of TV at CNN and other networks. Mm-hmm. And for 8 years, until 2023, you were a senior reporter and editor at Fortune magazine. You created the race and culture beat there and wrote the Race Ahead newsletter covering business and race and other issues of equity and social justice. Still, Fortune, a magazine about and really for people in business. That's fair to characterize it that way, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's for the people at the top of the game.
So does this mean that you are firmly pro-capitalist, not really down for questioning the status quo too deeply?
You know, it does not mean that, but thank you so much for raising this. In fact, part of my appeal in the Fortune crowd was being an outlier, asking some of these big questions about the failings and injustices of the business world as we know it, inequality and inequity. So, and I have spent a lot of time in the last few years talking with people inside corporations, leaders, workers, people who want to do better and are trying to do better. Although I will let everyone know I'm seriously skeptical about how much corporations themselves can or will change how they operate in the world. But they do have to be part of the conversation.
In our conversations, you have made it clear that you are here for all the questions.
I am. So, John, a question back at you. Previous seasons of Seen on Radio have made sharp critiques of capitalism as we know it. So with you as the primary reporter, can listeners expect this to be, a season-long anti-capitalist polemic?
Well, ultimately, that's in the eye or ear of the beholder. I'm sure some people will hear it that way, but I would say no. Yes, in past seasons, we pointed to deep problems that spring from this economic system, some of the things that we've just been talking about here. But what to do about all of it exactly? How to make our economy work for people and other living things, not the other way around? And for that matter, are there essential aspects of the current system we would miss if they were gone? I go into this project sincerely open-minded about all that.
I appreciate that, because the questions are complicated, and so the answers will be too. One last thing before we wrap up this introduction. The biggest question of all, what is capitalism? What are we talking about precisely? I feel like we need to define our terms at this point.
Yes, sure. Well, let's start with the dictionary definition, which usually goes something like this one from Oxford.
Capitalism, an economic and political system in which a country's trade and industry are controlled by private owners for profit.
But that needs a whole lot of unpacking, doesn't it?
Right. Not to mention that the capitalism of Wall Street in the 2020s is different from the capitalism of the 1970s, let alone the 1870s, or the version Adam Smith was talking about in the 1770s.
And by the way, Adam Smith didn't really say what a lot of people think he said, but we're getting ahead of ourselves.
So, we're going to tell the story and peel back the layers and let a richer understanding of capitalism unfold for us all.
Come along, folks. You can't see it, but I'm rubbing my hands together as we get ready to dig in. Next time, BC, before capitalism. This episode was made by me with Ellen McGirt and our story editor, Loretta Williams. Music by Michelle Osis, Lily Hayden, Goodnight Lucas, and Alex Simcox. Music consulting by Joe Augustine of Narrative Music. Our website, where we post transcripts, is scenonradio.org. This season is produced in partnership with Imperative 21. The show is distributed by our friends at PRX. Scene on Radio comes to you from the Kenan Institute for Ethics at Duke University.